She didn't come here to be seen. Just a quiet woman in the back row, arms folded, watching, listening. But when the head chef called out, voice laced with mockery, "You there in the plain shirt? Think you can do better?" The room turned. All eyes landed on her. Grace Miller looked up slowly, her gaze calm, unreadable. The stainless steel counters gleamed under fluorescent light. Aprons rustled. Somewhere a ladle clanged against a pot. The tension thickened like overcooked sauce. "She won't even try," someone whispered. "She's just a spectator." But Grace stepped forward, her hands steady. No badge, no title, just a quiet strength. What no one knew, what even she had forgotten, was that this moment would stir something long buried. Not ambition, not revenge. Something deeper, something she thought she'd lost forever. Grace stood by the edge of the room, blending into the chrome and white tile like a shadow. She wore a soft gray sweater, sleeves gently rolled, and her hair pulled back into a low knot spoke of someone who preferred function over flair. At 32, she had mastered the art of not drawing attention. Not out of fear, but out of choice. Across the room, her younger cousin Lily adjusted her apron, eyes scanning the recipe sheet nervously. Grace had signed her up for this class months ago, Chef Donna Reed's exclusive workshop where dreams were made or crushed in a single bite. "Are you nervous?" Lily whispered. Grace smiled, small and reassuring. "You'll be fine. Just cook with your heart." She didn't mention the memories this kitchen stirred, the flash of lights from past competitions, the noise, the pressure. All left behind, all intentionally forgotten. Until now. Grace moved quietly, taking a seat near the back as the class began. The clang of pots, the sharp scent of shallots hitting hot oil. It all came rushing back. Not painfully, not joyfully either. Just familiar. Like an old song you hadn't realized you remembered. Chef Donna's voice rang out sharp and clear. "This kitchen is for the committed. If you're here to play, there's the door." A few students chuckled nervously. Others straightened their posture, eyes wide, eager to prove themselves. Grace glanced at Lily, who was scribbling notes furiously. Beside her, an older woman, perhaps in her 70s, fumbled with her knife, the cutting board slipping as she tried to slice a tomato. A group of younger students snickered, not even trying to hide it. Grace's gaze softened. She had once been that woman, not in age, but in isolation, misjudged, outpaced, alone in a room full of noise. Her fingers tightened slightly around her teacup. Some things never really leave you. The tomato rolled off the board and onto the floor with a soft thud. The older woman, Mrs. Ellen, her name tag read, bent slowly to retrieve it, cheeks flushed. The snickering grew louder. One of the younger women leaned toward her friend and whispered, maybe she thought this was a tasting class. Grace rose before she even realized she was standing. She walked over, calm but purposeful, and picked up the tomato before Ellen could. "Let's swap boards," she said, gently offering hers. "Yours is too slick, it's slipping." Ellen looked up, startled. "Oh, thank you, dear. These knives are sharper than I expected." Grace smiled. "They always are at first." The room quieted just enough for people to notice the exchange. Chef Donna looked over from the stove, eyes narrowing. She didn't say anything yet, but Grace could feel the weight of her stare. Grace returned to her seat, heart steady. Helping someone shouldn't feel rebellious. And yet, here, it did. The next round began basic sauce techniques. Hollandaise, bechamel, velouté, names that once lived in Grace's bones. Chef Donna moved from station to station, correcting posture, criticizing seasoning, offering praise like breadcrumbs scattered rare. At Ellen's station, things weren't going well. The butter browned too fast. The flour clumped. Her hands trembled as she stirred, muttering under her breath, "It's not supposed to look like this, is it?" From across the room, Grace watched quietly. Then she spoke softly, just enough for Ellen to hear. "Lower the heat, just a touch. Let the butter settle before the flour." Ellen did as told, and the mixture smoothed almost instantly. but Grace wasn't the only one who noticed. Chef Donna turned sharply. "You giving instructions now?" Her voice was crisp, not angry, just testing. Grace didn't answer. She only smiled faintly. Eyes steady, and said, "Just sharing what's worked for me." It wasn't defiance, it was memory. Chef Donna walked toward Grace's side of the room, heels clicking in rhythm with the mounting silence. The class sensed tension. They leaned in, hungry for drama. Grace stayed seated calm, one hand resting lightly on her knee. Donna stopped just a few feet away. "You seem familiar with technique," she said, arms crossed. "Where did you train?" Grace met her eyes. "Nowhere recent." A pause. Not evasive, not proud, just honest. Donna's gaze dropped to Grace's hands, subtle calluses, faint scars near the knuckles, signs of long days with hot pans and sharp blades. "You've spent time in a kitchen," Donna stated. Grace offered only a small nod. "Well," Donna said, voice cool perhaps, "next time save your advice for your own station, if you decide to use it." She turned and walked away. Grace exhaled slowly. No anger, no shame. Just a quiet ripple inside her, the familiar pull of an old life brushing against the edges of her new one. Lily leaned in from the next table, whispering just loud enough. "What was that about?" "You okay?" Grace gave a tiny nod, her eyes still on the back of Chef Donna. "She's intense, that's all. You sure that's all it is?" Lily's voice carried a knowing edge. "You two have a history." Grace didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up a whisk and began absent-mindedly turning it in her hand, the handle resting perfectly between her fingers. "There was a time," she said softly, "when I wanted to be just like her." Lily tilted her head. "What happened?" Grace paused, then set the whisk down gently. "I learned that being sharp doesn't always mean being strong." Across the room, Ellen offered a small, grateful glance. Grace returned it with a warm smile barely perceptible but real. Some fires burn hot and quick. Others stay quietly lit, waiting. The scent of simmering butter and nutmeg drifted through the room as the class moved into sauce practice. Grace stayed back, her hands folded neatly, eyes following every movement, not to judge but to feel. At Ellen's station, the roux was coming together, a little thick but workable. Her face was tight with concentration, jaw clenched as she stirred. Grace stepped closer, slow and careful, and whispered, "Tilt the pan just a bit." "Let gravity help." Ellen adjusted. The mixture smoothed out. "I used to burn this every time Grace added almost to herself, even in restaurants. Butter's sensitive like that." Ellen smiled faintly. "You don't look like someone who burns anything." Grace chuckled. "You'd be surprised." She glanced toward the stainless counter. Her reflection stared back, wiser eyes, steadier hands, and a quiet grace she hadn't always owned. Sometimes it's not the recipe that changes, it's the person holding the spoon. As the class progressed, Chef Donna moved to the front, explaining reductions and seasoning balance with her signature clipped authority. Most students scribbled notes furiously. Ellen, however, simply listened, absorbing more with her eyes than her pen. Grace stood beside her, arms crossed loosely, observing both the lesson and the quiet battle inside Ellen's shoulders. "You should be up there," Lily whispered, nudging Grace gently. "You know all this already." Grace shook her head. "That's not why I'm here. But they don't know who you are." Lily pressed. "I'm not sure I do either," Grace said softly, her gaze distant. A beat passed. The sound of boiling stock filled the space between them. Then Chef Donna's voice rose sharp as a knife. "Let's see who among you can recreate a proper bechamel. Under pressure, volunteer." No one moved. Then slowly, Grace watched as Ellen lifted her hand, just slightly trembling. Grace's heart stilled for half a second. She didn't raise it alone. Grace's hand had gently nudged hers up. All eyes turned. Ellen's hand hovered in the air, uncertain, as if she herself wasn't sure how it got there. Chef Donna raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "You?" Ellen glanced at Grace, wide-eyed. Grace offered the softest of nods, more reassurance than instruction. "You've got this," she whispered. Chef Donna stepped aside. Very well. Station 2, the room murmured as Ellen shuffled forward. Her steps were careful, her expression a mix of fear and focus. Grace walked behind her not to intervene, but to stand near, like a quiet lighthouse. Ellen reached the stove, hands slightly shaking as she picked up the butter. Donna watched closely, arms crossed. "You'll need to narrate your process," she said. "This isn't a silent test." Ellen opened her mouth, then paused. Grace touched her elbow gently. "Just talk like you would to me," she said. Ellen nodded slowly, turned back to the pan and whispered to herself, "Start low. Let the butter breathe first." It wasn't perfect, but it had heart, and somehow everyone leaned in closer. The butter began to melt, gently bubbling. Ellen stirred slowly, voice just above a whisper. "Once it foams, I'll add the flour, little by little." Her tone was shaky, but her hands, steadied by presence more than confidence, moved with unexpected rhythm. Chef Donna circled slowly. "Why are you not using a whisk?" Ellen hesitated. I feel more in control with a spoon." Donna smirked. "We'll see if that works." Grace remained at the edge of the station, arms folded, eyes soft. She didn't step in, but her silence was filled with faith. The roux began to turn golden, the smell nutty and warm. Ellen added the milk with cautious precision. One stir, then another. A few students exchanged glances. This wasn't a disaster. It was working. Lily whispered behind them, almost to herself, "She's doing it." And for the first time, Ellen smiled, thin but real. Grace exhaled gently. Sometimes belief doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be there. As the sauce thickened, a quiet shift rippled through the room. The snickering students from earlier were now watching intently, their amusement replaced by something closer to respect, or perhaps confusion. Ellen, who moments ago fumbled with the tomato, now stirred with Grace, narrating each step in a voice that grew steadier by the minute. "I'll finish with a touch of nutmeg," she said softly, "and a pinch of salt, just enough to bring warmth." The aroma lifted from the pot, rich, smooth, comforting. A few students instinctively leaned closer, noses tilted. Chef Donna stepped in, spoon in hand. She dipped, tasted. A pause. Then acceptable. It wasn't praise. But in this kitchen, it was nearly an ovation. Ellen turned toward Grace, eyes shimmering. "I couldn't have done that without you," she whispered. Grace smiled. "You did all of it. I just stood close enough for you to remember you could." In the silence that followed, something unspoken passed between them, strength shared. The class resumed, but the energy had shifted, subtle like a breeze through a closed room. Students spoke in lower tones, glanced more often toward Grace and Ellen. Even Chef Donna paused a beat longer when her eyes passed over them. Back at their station, Ellen wiped the edge of her pot with a folded towel, careful, deliberate. Her hands, though still a little unsure, moved with the kind of respect only earned through vulnerability. Grace placed a lid on the pot and stepped back. Lily leaned in. "Did you see her face?" She looked proud. Grace nodded, though her gaze had drifted again to the far counter, a place she remembered standing years ago during her last competition. The copper pan still hung in perfect alignment above it. Her fingers instinctively flexed, remembering the weight of the knife, the heat of the spotlight. A ghost of a memory rose, applause. A silver trophy, Chef Donna's reluctant handshake. And yet, none of it felt as meaningful as the way Ellen had smiled 10 minutes ago. Not all victories shine. Some simply warm the room. After class, the room slowly emptied. Students packed up their knives, wiped down their stations, and buzzed with quiet chatter about sauces, textures, and what had just happened. Ellen stayed behind, carefully rinsing her utensils, though her eyes kept drifting toward Grace. "You've done this before," she said finally. Voice low, not pressing more, like wondering aloud. "More than just a class or two." Grace offered a small smile. "A lifetime ago." Ellen nodded slowly, then glanced down at her hands. "I used to bake with my husband," she said. "He passed last spring. I thought if I started cooking again I might feel less empty." Grace said nothing for a moment. Then, gently, "Did it help?" Ellen looked toward the sink, the steam rising from the water softening the air around them. "I think it might be starting to." Grace's voice softened almost a whisper. "That's how it comes back. Not all at once, just enough to remind you you're still here." And in that shared silence, something quietly healed. The next morning, Grace arrived early. The kitchen was still half-lit, quiet except for the hum of the overhead lights and the soft clink of metal being arranged. She walked to the same spot she always chose near the back, near the edge. Close enough to see everything, far enough to stay unseen. At her station, she found something unexpected. A folded napkin. Inside it, a single almond cookie slightly cracked, still warm, and a handwritten note on lined paper. "Thank you for not letting me walk out." Grace stood still, the note resting in her palm, thumb tracing the shaky script. She didn't need grand words. This was more than enough. She took a bite of the cookie sweet nutty, a little uneven but full of care. Just like Ellen. As she chewed, she smiled quietly to herself, eyes lifting to the kitchen window where soft morning light streamed in across the counter. Some mornings didn't need music or noise, just kindness returned. By the time the other students trickled in, the room felt different. Warmer somehow, as if the tension had loosened its grip overnight. Ellen entered quietly, head held a little higher, her apron neatly pressed. She didn't cling to the back wall this time. She walked straight to her station with a calmness that hadn't been there before. Lily caught Grace's eye and mouthed, "She looks different." Grace nodded, but said nothing. Chef Donna entered, last clipboard in hand, the usual chill in her stride. Her eyes swept the room, pausing momentarily on Grace just long enough to register her presence again, then on Ellen, who stood straight and ready, hands folded. Today's task, classic French omelette, simple in theory, unforgiving in execution. As Donna spoke, Grace noticed two younger students, those who'd laughed before, now sneaking glances at Ellen. Not mocking, studying. Grace leaned back slightly, watching the scene unfold. Sometimes change doesn't arrive with applause. It enters through respect earned in silence. Eggs cracked, whisks stirred. Butter hissed gently in pans across the room. Grace stood behind Ellen, not instructing, just being there like a calm breath in the storm of sizzling oil and nervous glances. Ellen moved with quiet intention, pouring the eggs into the pan, her wrist steady. Chef Donna strolled the room, observing. When she passed Ellen, she stopped watching in silence as the edges of the omelet curled just slightly. "Don't overfill it," Donna warned flatly. Ellen didn't flinch. She simply added the herbs with delicate fingers, chives, a whisper of parsley, and folded the omelet with surprising grace. Grace watched the moment closely, not for the food, but for the way Ellen's shoulders stayed relaxed, her breathing even. Lily whispered, "She's doing it." Grace replied softly, "She was always able to. She just forgot for a while." The pan clicked against the counter as Ellen plated the omelet. No applause, no praise, just a soft nod from Donna, and that was enough. Class ended with the usual cleanup, the scrape of chairs, the clatter of pans into sinks, the low murmur of tired voices. But at Station 2, something lingered in the air, subtle and golden like the last warmth of a sunset. Ellen stood before her empty pan, a faint sheen of butter still glistening on the surface. She didn't move right away, just looked at it for a moment like someone remembering a song they hadn't sung in years. Grace approached, towel slung over one shoulder. "You plated with confidence," she said, folding her arms lightly. "I didn't even realize I was doing it," Ellen replied, a soft laugh beneath her breath. "My hands remembered. They usually do," Grace said, eyes kind. "When we finally let them." Ellen looked down, then slowly reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small photo, worn at the edges, creased. "My husband loved omelets," she said. "Every Sunday." Grace took a quiet breath, then placed her hand gently over Ellen's. "Then I think he'd be proud today." Nothing more was said. It didn't need to be. That evening, the kitchen was quiet long after the class ended. Grace stayed behind, wiping down counters with slow, rhythmic motions. The kind of task she didn't rush. The kind that let thoughts surface softly like steam rising from a pot, slow and fragrant. She reached beneath the prep table to return a mixing bowl and caught sight of something tucked in the corner, an old chalkboard menu from a past event. Faded words, half erased, still visible, Chef Donna Reed. Taste of Provence. She smiled faintly. She had stood under that sign once. Long ago, a different life. Behind her, Lily appeared with 2 mugs of tea, holding one out. For you, chamomile. Grace accepted it gratefully. Thanks. They stood side by side, sipping in silence. Why did you stop? Lily asked quietly. Grace didn't look at her, just stared out the window where the night had begun to settle. Because I forgot why I started. A long pause. And then, barely above a whisper, but maybe I'm starting to remember. The next morning, Grace arrived before anyone else. She liked the stillness, the way the kitchen seemed to hold its breath before the day began. She brewed a small pot of coffee, just enough for 2, and set it beside the window where morning light painted soft gold across the tiles. 2 mugs, 1 seat occupied, 1 left empty. She placed her own cup down, then gently rested a second untouched mug across from her. No one would sit there. Not today. It was her mother's favorite ritual, coffee before the noise. No talk, just the comfort of company. That seat had stayed empty for years, and yet Grace still set it every now and then. A quiet act of memory, not grief. She sipped slowly, watching steam curl into the sunbeams. Somewhere in the garden beyond the window, a bird called soft, distant. She didn't need words to feel close. Some absences are never filled. They're just honored. Later that morning, the class gathered around as Chef Donna introduced the day's lesson, handmade pasta. Flour dusted the air eggs, cracked in practiced rhythm, and voices rose in scattered bursts of chatter. At her station, Grace moved with quiet ease, guiding Lily through the feel of the dough rather than the steps. It's not about measurements, she murmured. It's about listening with your hands. Lily frowned playfully. That sounds like something out of a fortune cookie. Grace smiled. Maybe, but it's still true. Beside them, Ellen was already kneading with surprising confidence, her fingers pressing into the dough with newfound rhythm. The other students began glancing her way, not mocking now, but curious. Chef Donna passed by, watching silently. You're making progress, she told Ellen almost reluctantly. Ellen glanced at Grace, then back at her dough. I have good company. Donna's eyes shifted briefly to Grace. And you, still not ready to show us what you really know? Grace looked up, her voice even. Maybe I already am, just not the way you expect. Donna didn't respond, but something in her pause felt like acknowledgement. The room filled with soft rhythms, the thud of dough against wood, the creak of rolling pins, the quiet hum of focused breath. Grace stood beside Lily, her hands guiding the motion but never taking over. Let it talk to you, she said gently. The dough will tell you when it's ready. Lily laughed under her breath. You and this talking food thing. Grace grinned. It's never steered me wrong. Across the room, Ellen was shaping her pasta into ribbons, not perfect, but smooth, clean, consistent. Her brow furrowed in concentration, but her hands moved with less hesitation now. There was grace in her effort, not just in her name. Chef Donna paused by her again. You've improved. Ellen nodded, not boastful, simply present. Good, Donna said, moving on though her eyes lingered an extra second on Grace. Grace caught the glance but didn't hold it. Instead, she brushed flour from her hands, looked down at the thin golden strands she'd helped create and thought, there are many ways to lead a kitchen. Some start with a voice. Others start with a hand offered quietly. After class, while most of the students packed up, Ellen lingered by her station, carefully folding her apron as if it were something sacred. Grace stepped over with a damp cloth, wiping the counter beside her. I haven't felt like this in years, Ellen said softly. Flour in your hair, Grace teased. Ellen laughed. No. Capable. She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn, creased index card, edges frayed, the ink faded in places. My husband's pasta recipe, handwritten smudged full of his messy notes. Grace leaned in, reading the scribbles. Too much garlic. Never. Add laughter essential. She smiled. He cooked with heart. He cooked for us, Ellen said, every Sunday, even when his hands shook. Grace held the card a little longer before handing it back. You're carrying more than memory. Ellen nodded. I'm trying to carry him forward. The two women stood in silence for a moment, the air filled with something tender and invisible. Some recipes don't just feed us, they remind us we were loved. The next day, Grace arrived a few minutes later than usual. The class was already in motion, steam, rising voices overlapping metal clinking against wood and ceramic. She slipped into her place quietly, nodding to Ellen, who offered her a soft smile and a quick thumbs up. Lily waved from across the room, elbow deep in dough. But something else caught Grace's eye. Chef Donna stood near the back, speaking with a tall man in a Navy chef's coat, early 50s, well-kept, beard eyes sharp behind his glasses. He wasn't a student. He looked like someone used to kitchens with stars above their names. He glanced at the room with curiosity, but his eyes stopped on Grace. Just a flicker. Just long enough. Grace felt the strange pull of recognition, though his face didn't spark memory. She turned away, pretending not to notice. Donna's voice cut through the hum. Today, we test improvisation. No recipes, just instinct. Murmurs rose, a few groans, but Grace smiled faintly to herself. Instinct, she thought, that I still trust. The assignment was clear. Create a dish from memory, heart, or heritage. No notes, no recipes, no hints. Around the room, students whispered in pairs, debating ingredients, nervously opening drawers and coolers. Some clung to classics. Others froze. At Station 3, Grace stood still, hands resting gently on the counter. She didn't move right away. Everything okay? Lily asked, approaching with a flour-dusted apron and wide eyes. Grace nodded. I'm just listening. To what Grace smiled, faint and far away. To what wants to be cooked today. She began gathering ingredients: shallots, white wine, fresh thyme, a handful of wild mushrooms. No measuring spoons, no hesitation. Ellen watched her from across the room, then quietly turned to her own station and began peeling an apple, slow, steady, without asking why. From the back, the visiting man in the navy coat leaned forward, watching Grace's movements. Chef Donna noticed. She didn't say a word, but her arms slowly uncrossed. Grace moved like someone who had never left. The olive oil hit the pan with a soft sizzle. Shallots followed, diced fine, translucent in seconds. She didn't rush. She didn't speak. Her body did the remembering. Thyme leaves slipped between her fingers. Mushrooms caramelized gently, releasing their earthy perfume. She deglazed with wine, not too much, just enough to catch the fond at the bottom of the pan. Around her, the room began to slow. Conversations quieted. A few students stopped mid-task to watch, not because she demanded attention, but because her stillness had weight. At the back, the man in the navy coat folded his arms. His eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but recognition. Chef Donna stood beside him, voice low. She doesn't use recipes. She never did. The man murmured. Donna said nothing. Her gaze remained fixed on Grace, who now spooned a delicate sauce onto a wide white plate. Not dramatic, not flashy, just perfect. The kind of cooking you couldn't fake. The class moved in slow rhythm now, like the kitchen itself had taken a breath, as if time had gently bent around Grace's station. She garnished the plate with a single sprig of thyme and stepped back, wiping her hands on her apron. Nothing about her said, "Look at me," and yet everyone did. The man in the navy coat took a slow step forward, then another, until he stood just outside her station. "You've done that before," he said quietly, nodding toward the plate. Grace looked up, expression unreadable. "A few times." He extended a hand, careful, respectful. "Daniel Hart, Culinary Director, Nouvelle Table." Grace hesitated, then shook it brief but firm. Grace Miller. Daniel studied her face a beat longer. You were at Lumiere, weren't you? Years ago. A pause. Then Grace gave a soft smile. I was. Behind them, Chef Donna stood still, the name Lumiere hitting like a distant bell. Grace turned away, returning to her pan. Not running. Not hiding. Just cooking. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room as Daniel's voice carried farther than intended. Lumiere. Even the students who didn't know what it was felt the shift. They looked at Grace differently now, not just as the quiet woman in plain clothes, but as someone with a past suddenly unfolding. Chef Donna stepped forward, arms crossed. Her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharp. You never said you were Grace Miller. Grace glanced at her calm. You never asked. Donna's lips pressed into a line. You walked away at the top. I did, Grace replied. Why? Grace looked down at her hands, then at the sauce-streaked plate in front of her. I forgot who I was cooking for. The room fell silent. Donna's voice dropped almost softer now. And who are you cooking for today? Grace turned to Ellen, to Lily, to the young student frozen mid-dice watching her every move. For them, she said, and for the part of me I almost left behind. It wasn't an announcement. It was a homecoming. The energy in the kitchen shifted again, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. Like a new key had been pressed in a familiar melody, and suddenly everyone heard it differently. Students returned to their stations with quieter hands, more careful eyes. Even Donna, once sharp as a blade, now moved more slowly, less like a judge, and more like someone remembering. Ellen stood beside Grace holding a small bowl of poached pears and cream. I didn't know you were someone. Grace looked at her gently. I'm not. I was. Ellen's eyes softened. That makes sense. Lily leaned in, her voice hushed but awed. You were famous. Grace smiled faintly. Fame fades. The good meals stay. She lifted Ellen's bowl, gave it one small turn, and added a few leaves of lemon thyme on top. There she whispered, Now it tells a story. No textbooks had taught that. Only time, and love, and loss, and the quiet return to why you ever held a knife in the first place. Chef Donna called for tastings. One by one, students brought forward their improvised dishes, some trembling, some proud, most unsure. She offered notes, as always, concise, surgical. Then Ellen stepped up. Her dessert was simple wine-poached pears with spiced cream and a touch of lemon thyme. Nothing ornate, nothing loud. Donna studied the plate. Did you follow a recipe? Ellen shook her head. Just memory. Donna tasted. Silence. She set the spoon down slowly. Elegant. It was the most praise she had given all day. Ellen's eyes glistened, but she held steady. Then came Grace, though she hadn't planned to present. Donna gestured anyway. You've already stirred enough curiosity. Let's see it. Grace brought forward her wild mushroom ragout nestled over hand-cut tagliatelle. No garnish flourish, just a plate that smelled like warmth and October forests. Donna tasted. She didn't speak. Then, after a long pause, still precise. Grace tilted her head, still listening. Donna looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. Maybe I forgot how to do that. Not judgment, not rivalry, just honesty. The class ended earlier than usual that day, yet no one rushed to leave. Students lingered in pockets, some silently cleaning, others sharing small bites, replaying moments. The hum of the kitchen softened into a kind of thoughtful quiet. Grace stood by the sink, rinsing her utensils. Donna approached not with a clipboard, but with 2 small tasting spoons. One more, she asked, holding one out. Grace took it without hesitation. Donna reached into her own prep bowl, something she'd been working on in the background. A citrus sabayon, silky and bright. Grace tasted it. Closed her eyes. Let it speak. Too much sugar? Donna asked, almost playfully. Grace shook her head. Just enough sadness to make it beautiful. Donna blinked, caught off guard by the answer, then quietly nodded. This was never about proving anything, Grace said, setting down the spoon. Not for me. Donna replied, her voice low. It used to be, for both of us. They stood there, two women, no longer competing, no longer pretending they weren't once the same kind of hungry. And in that still moment, they learned something the kitchen never taught: how to let go. Later that afternoon, after most had gone, Grace remained in the kitchen organizing the last of the utensils. The soft clatter of spoons into drawers echoed gently through the quiet. She opened the bottom drawer near the instructor's station to return a ladle and paused. Inside, tucked beneath a stack of linen towels, was a faded photo. Curiosity nudged her. She picked it up. It was a snapshot, Copenhagen, 2013. A younger Grace stood in the center, holding a silver trophy, eyes lit with something fierce and unguarded. Beside her in the corner of the frame stood Chef Donna, arms, crossed face, unreadable, jaw tight. Grace stared at it for a moment. She remembered that day. The heat of competition, the rush, the exhaustion, the silence in her hotel room that night after all the applause had faded. Donna's voice sounded behind her. I never threw it away. Grace turned. Donna leaned against the counter, not defensive, just there. Why? Grace asked softly. Donna shrugged. I wanted to forget you, but I couldn't. Grace looked back at the photo, then gently slipped it back into the drawer. Neither could I, she said, but maybe it means something different now. They let the drawer close without another word. Some memories didn't need rewriting, just reframing. The next morning, the air smelled of warm spices and roasted garlic. It was the kind of scent that wrapped around you soft as an old quilt. Grace arrived early again this time with a small wooden box under her arm. She walked to her usual station and unpacked it with care: dried bay leaves, a glass jar of preserved lemons, a bundle of handwritten cards tied with kitchen twine. Lily approached, curious. What's all that? Grace smiled. Pieces of someone I loved. She untied the twine and pulled one card from the bundle. Faded ink. Stains from time and sauce. No title, no name. My father used to write down recipes as he cooked, she said, but he never named them. Said food didn't need a label to be remembered, just love. She placed the card beside her cutting board. Across the room, Ellen noticed and quietly mirrored the gesture, removing a folded napkin from her pocket and placing it near her own station. No words, just presence. In that moment, nothing was being cooked yet, and yet everything was already warm. As the class began, Chef Donna gave the assignment, make a dish that means something, not to impress, to remember. No measurements, no timing, just instinct and memory. The room filled with motion knives, tapping pans, hissing water boiling. But at Grace's station, things moved slowly. She wasn't in a rush. She was listening again. She chose ingredients with a kind of reverence: leeks cream, a splash of dry sherry, a squeeze of roasted garlic. Lily peeked over. What are you making? Grace smiled. Something my father made once, on a rainy Tuesday. That specific, Grace nodded. He never made it again, but I never forgot the way it tasted: warm, soft, like a secret only we shared. The sauce came together gently, the smell rising like a whisper. Grace didn't stir constantly. She let it breathe. She let it wait. Some flavors take their time, just like healing, just like forgiveness. And when she finally tasted it, her eyes closed, not in triumph, but in homecoming. Grace plated the dish with simple care. No elaborate flourish, just soft leeks and velvety sauce nestled against a slice of toasted country bread, its edges golden, the center slightly torn like memory itself. She set it down gently, then stepped back. Chef Donna approached slowly. No clipboard, no critiques prepared. Just her. She took a bite. For a moment, nothing moved. Then she looked up, eyes softer than they'd been in years. This tastes like something you never wanted to forget. Grace nodded. I didn't know I remembered it until I started cooking. Donna breathed out, her voice low. That's how you know it matters. From behind, Daniel watched with quiet recognition. Lily, standing close, whispered, That smells like home. Grace smiled at her. Maybe that's all cooking ever is, trying to bring back something we loved. Donna didn't speak again. She just took another bite slower this time, and Grace knew this was the first plate she'd served in years that didn't need applause. It only needed to be felt. After the tasting, the room stayed unusually still, students quietly cleaning but no one eager to leave. It was as if the food had said more than words could. Grace returned to her station, gently wiping her board. As she folded her apron, Ellen approached holding a small cloth pouch in her hand. "I found this last night," Ellen said, voice hushed. "It was his. My husband's. He used to carry a few spices in it when we traveled." Grace took the pouch carefully, its linen soft with age. She opened it. Inside were 3 tiny jars, nutmeg, cinnamon, and something floral she couldn't quite place. "He said recipes weren't rules," Ellen added. "They were conversations." Grace smiled, closing the pouch. Then his voice still speaks. Ellen touched Grace's arm. "Because of you." Behind them, Chef Donna stood alone at her station, watching, not evaluating, just witnessing. Then, quietly, she stepped aside and gestured to her own spotless countertop. "Would you like to take this one tomorrow?" she asked. Grace paused, not to hesitate, but to feel the weight of the moment. Then she nodded once. "Some stations aren't taken. They're given when you're ready." The next morning, the sun filtered through the high windows with a soft amber glow. The kitchen buzzed quietly as students prepared for the final class. But something was different. At the head station, Chef Donna's usual post, stood Grace. She wore the same soft gray sweater sleeves, rolled hair in its usual low knot. No name tag, no title, just presence. Chef Donna stood beside her, briefly adjusting her coat, then folded her apron with careful precision. She placed it on the edge of the counter and, without a word, stepped aside. Grace nodded, accepting the quiet exchange. Not a handoff of authority, but of trust. As the students gathered around, Grace looked at them, not from above, but at eye level. Ellen stood near the front, smiling gently. Lily was beside her, notebook in hand, eyes bright. Grace placed her palms flat on the counter, breathing in the familiar scent of flour and copper and stories. "I don't have rules for you today," she said. A pause. "Only questions. Like, who are you cooking for, and why does it matter?" No applause, just stillness. And, in that stillness, attention. Grace didn't walk the room like Donna used to. She moved slowly, station to station, not correcting, but noticing. At one table, a young man added too much rosemary. She didn't scold. She dipped a spoon and tasted and said, "That flavor will keep talking long after everything else quiets down. What do you want it to say?" He nodded, understanding more from that one question than any lecture. At Ellen's side, Grace leaned in. "What are you making?" "Something my husband used to talk about but never got to try. It's more memory than recipe." "That's the best kind," Grace whispered. Over at Lily's station, a sauce had broken. Tears welled in Lily's eyes. "I ruined it." Grace knelt beside her. "Look at me." Lily looked up. "You didn't ruin anything. You just made something honest. Now, let's build from it." The class listened not just with ears, but with something deeper. Because what Grace gave them wasn't technique. It was permission to make mistakes, to feel, to remember, and to begin again. As the final hour of the class unfolded, something gentle settled over the kitchen. Not excitement, not pride, but a quiet reverence. Each station buzzed with mindful motion like small heartbeats beating in rhythm. There was no final test, no ranking. Just one shared table and the invitation to bring forth one dish. Whatever it meant, however it tasted. Grace stood beside that table watching as students placed their offerings down, bowls of soup, torn bread salads, uneven pies with perfect intention. Each dish was a story, and she received them like pages in a worn family journal. Ellen presented her creation last. A warm apple galette, rustic, humble edges, imperfect. "I almost didn't come to this class," she said softly. "But I'm leaving with more than I came for." Grace didn't answer. She just picked up a fork, tasted, and smiled. "Tell me about the cinnamon," she asked. Ellen's voice wavered. It was his favorite. "I never used it after he passed." Grace nodded gently. "You just did." And the room, for a long, tender moment, held its breath, because that taste wasn't just memory. It was healing. The class was over. Aprons hung on hooks, pans soaked in warm water, laughter and farewells echoed softly, but no one rushed to leave. Something about the room asked to be lingered in like the last notes of a song too beautiful to end. Grace remained by the counter, hands resting gently on the wood. Beside her, the lemon-thyme ragout had long cooled. Still, the scent clung to the air, familiar, quiet, alive. Chef Donna approached not as an instructor, but as a peer. "You gave them more than a lesson," she said. Grace smiled. They already had what they needed. "I just reminded them." Then a quiet voice broke the silence. Ellen stepped forward, holding something wrapped in a cloth napkin. "Before you go, this belonged to someone who taught me how to love through food. I think it wants to keep traveling." She unfolded the napkin inside a wooden spoon, aged smooth with time, and used the handle darkened by decades of stirring. Grace froze. Her breath caught not from surprise but from recognition. She ran her fingers over the faint carving near the base, for warmth, not for praise. It was her mother's spoon. The one Grace thought had been lost when the old family kitchen was sold. She'd never spoken of it, never searched. "How?" she whispered. Ellen's eyes glistened. "I bought it at a yard sale. Years ago. I didn't know where it came from. Until today." Grace held the spoon in both hands, quiet as a prayer, and just like that the classroom disappeared. The fame, the silence, the lost years folded gently into the grain of old wood and memory. She didn't take the spotlight. She didn't stay. She simply turned to leave with her mother's spoon tucked in her bag, and something lit again inside her that didn't need to be named. Because some flames don't burn out. They pass on hand to hand, heart to heart, and sometimes they find their way home.